Welcome back to the Fireforge Leader Podcast. Now, I want you to picture this. You've prepared for weeks. Your heart is pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves. You're ready to present your big idea. You're going to ask for that promotion, or you're even going to express your feelings to someone special. And then the crushing weight of doubt descends upon you, and it whispers, what if they say no? Now, rejection isn't just a word. It's an emotional beast that can paralyze. It can paralyze our dreams. It stifles our voices and keeps us locked in this comfort zone. But what if I told you that embracing the fear of rejection could be the key to unlocking a life of authenticity and boldness? Hey, I'm Steve Baumgartner, your host, and my mission here today and the mission of this podcast is to serve you through providing knowledge, tools, and resources around leadership on three primary battlefronts. Those battlefronts are simply out in your workplace, in your communities, and most importantly, with your family. Now let's get to work.
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fireforge Leader Podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in the Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire-Forged Leader.
I don't know about you, but this feeling comes up a lot for me. I felt this feeling long ago when I was a teen, and even as a young adult, when I was asking for a young lady to date. It rears its head now when I'm asking for something in the workplace, a certain project, an approval on something, or whatever. And I definitely feel it every time that I even step up to this microphone, or when I'm going to present something to a large audience. And I've really started to think about this concept since my last interview, the interview that I did with Mr. Drew Dudley, where we talked about this theory of rejection therapy, which this theory, just to give you a quick overview, is supposed to help you get over these feelings and these thoughts of being rejected by putting yourself into training, if you will, of being rejected. The result, however, is much more positive than negative. And this all sounds weird, I know. I understand that we are all afraid. We are afraid of one thing or another, but let's face it, most of our fears are unfounded. They are based in things that we have no evidence at all. None. No evidence to support our fears. And we rely on this due to simply basic instincts. We as human beings are wired to survive. It comes from the days that we ran away from saber-toothed tigers and other beastly beasts. It's what kept us alive. It kept us safe. And it's now what we learn in schools as the fight or flight response. Now, while some of us still need this reflex, MMA fighters, people who live in areas that are more dangerous than others, maybe the Middle East, maybe in places that don't have as many freedoms, maybe for their financial standings, they live in more dangerous areas, or people that I'm close to who put themselves in these areas. They need to rely on these reflexes still. But for most of us, those instincts are a thing of the past because we live in this world that has evolved past needing those type of fight or flight responses. But it doesn't matter because it still kicks in. And it kicks in falsely most of the time with the things that I've stated. We have no evidence of. In these situations, it still kicks in. And generally, this is due to things like cognitive biases. It's not based off from facts. So let's take a step back and really understand what I'm talking about here. I want to talk to you about rejection therapy. So, first and foremost, let's give credit where credit is due. As Drew Dudley mentioned, a fellow Canadian by the name of Jason Comely originally coined this term. And Jason coined this term and he used it to overcome his own fears. So here's what it is. Rejection therapy, by definition, is a social game and self-help tool that is designed to help individuals overcome their fear of rejection by simply and intentionally seeking out situations where they're likely to be rejected. So an example that Drew talked about was these people that he met who founded this company, and they wanted to do this rejection therapy. So they would go up and ask police officers, hey, can we shoot your weapons at these street signs? And they knew that they were going to get rejected, but they wanted to build up this resiliency to it. So the idea that by facing rejection repeatedly, individuals can desensitize themselves to the fear and anxiety associated with that rejection, they ultimately become more resilient and more confident people. So there's a couple principles that go along with it. And I just kind of want to walk through this. All right. So I'm going to give you the answer up front, and then I'll talk about my own examples. This is just textbook rejection therapy. This is not my idea. I want to make that clear. So the core principle of rejection therapy is simply the exposure to rejection. And once again, by deliberately putting ourselves in situations where rejection is possible or likely, we become more accustomed to it. And overall, it takes away our fears. So desensitization is what this is all about. And just like exposure therapy for phobias, rejection therapy, it aims to desensitize us to the emotional sting of rejection. The more that we experience rejection, the less intense our reaction to it becomes. And then we build resilience. Through repeated exposure to these rejections, we build emotional resilience. When we get told no, when we get told that we cannot, it's like a cut. And that cut becomes a scar. And the next cut doesn't scar as easy. And we learn that rejection is not the end of the world. And we learn how to handle it. And we learn how to move on from that scar. It also improves our social skills when we engage in these sorts of things. And I'm laughing because I'm thinking about myself and my wife, and I'll get into all that later. But when we engage in activities that might lead to rejection, we often improve our social skills. We can become better at communicating. We become better at negotiation and handling those interpersonal interactions. And ultimately, what we do is we redefine our failures. When we do rejection therapy, we encourage ourselves and the people that we're around, the people that we lead, to see rejection not as a personal failure, but as a learning experience and as an opportunity for growth. All right, so how can we do this, right? And I'm going to go through some nonsense examples right now, but let's say that you're walking in the mall. All right. Do people still do that? I don't know. Let's go with it. You're walking in the mall and you're passing someone. You've never met this person before in your life. Ask them for a high five. Hey, dude, high five. Bop. Right? How about when you're out dining with your family? That you negotiate the price of the ticket. Or simply going over to your neighbor's house and asking them to borrow something. How about when you're at the Hilton desk and you go, hey, how about a free upgrade? Can I get that suite over there? What do you think? Or when you're at work, going up to one of your coworkers and going, hey, I want to get better at my job. Can you give me a little bit of feedback, on how I might do that? So here's some examples. And I told you that I was going to use my wife and myself because we are wired a lot differently. So for example, my wife and I went to a couple of garage sales this weekend. And it's not because we need anything. It's because, it's something that we just go and look at someone else's junk, and it seems to be fun for both of us, right? Well, my wife, she picks up this item, right? And she's looking at it and she sees the price. Oh, $15.99. That's exactly what I'm going to pay, right? Me, on the other hand, I'm like picking up this. I got a little bit of that. I got this over here. And I'm like, you take $5 for that? And, those examples, my wife is afraid of offending the person, right? And that's not a bad quality to have. And I don't blame my wife for it at all. When I first started doing that, I was, ooh, what if they tell me no? I don't want to offend them, blah, blah, blah. But the more I do it, the more fun it becomes, right? And they're like, yeah, sure, $5, that's great. We overprice that junk anyways. We just wanted to get it out the house. Or they come back and they barter and they're like, no, how about 8? It's still better than what the original price was. It was better than what I expected. And sometimes they just say no. And that's fine too. So, I've done this, quite a bit over time. For example, this podcast. I've had some amazing guests on here. And before I learned about this theory of rejection therapy, what I used to call it was the power of not giving a shit. And I'm sorry to all my wonderful guests that I've had on here, but that's really what it was, right? I figured at one point in time that if I wanted to have amazing guests on this podcast, that I was just going to have to simply start asking people, right? And if I asked enough people, that the percentage was going to weigh out in my favor. And to be honest with you, that percentage is a lot higher than what I expected it to be. There's sometimes, and I'm trying to think of an example, but there's sometimes that, my wife is like, hey, it would be cool if, the kids could talk to so-and-so over there. And I walk right up to them and I go, hey, I'd like to introduce you to my kids. And sometimes I do this to friends of mine, right? They want to know somebody or, be introduced to somebody. And I don't know them, but I'll walk right up to them and go, hey, my friend wanted to meet you. Here's my friend, right? And generally it ends up working out a lot better than expected. So let's talk about some of those benefits that come from it, right? I talked about a lot of things and how it's benefited me, right? But through trial and error, through experimentation, through this actually becoming a real thing, people have noticed a reduced fear. So by repeatedly facing rejection, the people who have tried this therapy, they have found that they can significantly reduce their fear and anxiety, excuse me. Whew, that was a hard word for some odd reason. It boosts their confidence. They successfully navigated rejection and they get a self-esteem and confidence boost through it. They've had personal growth. They face fears head on. And it promotes personal growth and resilience. Most of the people who speak into my life right now, it was because I had the balls. And that's it. Simply the balls to reach out to them and go, hey, I noticed you're better at this than I am. Can you help me out with this? And it leads to my own personal growth. And of course, improved interpersonal skills, right? So I look at my wife, I look at myself, and my wife, I'm just going to tell you straight out, she is a wonderful mother. She is a wonderful wife. She does many, many things very well. But she's also an introvert. And I used to be an introvert too. I know that's hard to believe. But I used to be an introvert as well. And where she still is, I am not. And that's because I started taking risks and I started understanding that my fears are not legitimate. And I started stacking those wins. And now I can communicate with just about anybody. I'm heading in August to Australia. First time in my life. Am I scared about it? No. Because I have stacked up wins of being able to communicate with people. So I told you about it. Quite a few different ways that I've practiced this in my life, even though I didn't know about the actual therapy, right? But it's helped me get podcast guests. Various promotions. I'm going to talk about work for a second, right? I have probably never had the qualifications for any job role that I've had in my life. If I was to look down through the job description and qualifications, I would never meet that. What have I done? I have been promoted into role after role. I've led engineers. I've led people with master's degrees, bachelor's degrees, you name it, doctorates, without me having any one of those degrees, without having those qualifications on paper. But taking a step into it and going, hey, Mr. VP, I'd like to try this role. I think I'm suited for it. Can we have that conversation? Has led to more promotions than simply putting in my resume or application or anything like that. I've taken speaking opportunities from simply asking for them. Oh, yeah, and getting paid for them. All right. So to simply wrap this up, I've been thinking about this a lot in the days since I talked to Drew Dudley. Even though I haven't intentionally tried rejection therapy, I have taken risks in fear of rejection. These fears, or these risks, have brought me a ton of success in both my career and with my podcast and speaking opportunities. And I personally would suggest trying something today that you normally fear and see what the outcome is. It's not going to kill you. It may not be what you asked for, but most of the time it's probably going to be better than what you're expecting. So once again, I'd like to thank you for tuning into the Fireforge Leader podcast. If you found this episode insightful, I'd like you to simply share it with other people who might benefit from this message. I'd also ask you to give this show a rating and review so that other people know why you listen to the Fireforge Leader podcast. Until next time, keep striving for excellence in all that you do.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the forge.